Greetings, Exiles, I'm Gav. I don't know about you all, but I've been playing a lot of Path of Exile 2. Coming in at over 200 hours at this point, some of which is probably AFK time, but I've definitely made a dent in the game. So I wanted to take this time before the holiday season to discuss my thoughts so far in the early access. So far, I'm level 90 on my crit Ice Strike Invoker, and I'm comfortably clearing tier 15 and 16 Waystones and farming the endgame. I haven't faced the Pinnacle boss or the Breach boss yet. I'm still improving the build and searching for these elusive citadels that you have to find. I also have a level 80 Witch Hunter that I'm tinkering with. I wanted to break the game down into sections in order to analyze each on its own merits. This will be an honest but balanced review regarding my experience these first few weeks. I'll also provide my updated opinions at the end of early access, which is speculated to be 6 to 12 months from now. While I'm personally absolutely in love with Path of Exile 2, I can recognize that it's not a game for everyone, and there's definitely some areas that deserve critique. But I want to stress up front that I think this game foundationally is a success already, and it's only up from here, Exiles. Let's start off with the campaign and leveling experience. Compared to Path of Exile 1, where new players find themselves thrust into over a decade of patches, not to mention content updates and feature bloat, these new Path of Exile 1 players are given little to no assistance or guidance. Then they open up the passive tree and everything instantly becomes more scary and confusing. Path of Exile 2 actually does a great job onboarding a newer player. The standout things for me were the new skill gem system, which we'll talk about next. But honestly, I was most impressed by the tooltips. You can hold Alt and hover over every single underlined word to understand all the mechanics and interactions. This is huge all around for new players, and I found it extremely helpful as well. And I've got over 1,000 hours in Path of Exile 1. The difficulty of the campaign and bosses was really punchy, and I loved that. My experience leveling on my monk was very smooth and enjoyable. By fully exploring every zone and grabbing all the extra stuff GGG threw in there for us to find, I felt like I always had a plethora of uncut gems and my gear was decent enough. And through this, I got to pretty much try out all of the skills I was interested in on the Quarterstaff Monk in order to find the one that I enjoyed the most. This was all before the buffs that they gave to campaign boss loot. I was in maps by then. The skill combo I found was Tempest Flurry and Tempest Bell with Charged Staff, and I was using Siphoning Strike to consume the shock for power charges on bosses to get Charged Staff online, and then I dropped the bell and they were just done. For some reason, Tempest Bell was proccing a lot with this setup and just obliterating bosses. I easily cruised through every single fight after this and into maps I went. So obviously I'm a bit biased here. I got lucky and found a seemingly overtuned combo early on in my playthrough, and I built completely around it. And even I died to boss mechanics a few times. The game is hard, there's no doubt about it, and that's why it's probably not a game for everyone. The accessibility and onboarding is a huge step up, but they stuck to their guns on making Path of Exile and Rayclass not for the faint of heart. Personally though, every time I died to a boss, it just lit a fire under my ass to kill it. After playing back through the campaign on my mercenary, even with a few leveling uniques I had acquired, it was a much different experience and difficulty curve. And that's where my critique comes in, on the pacing. Acts 1 to 3 were gritty and difficult, and every final boss fight and Ascendancy trial felt epic, as well as frustrating at the same time, but I just craved more. Cruel difficulty and onward into maps felt easy mode for me, even on the mercenary. My builds had come online by then on both characters, and I just felt powerful the whole way through. I hope to see Acts 4 to 6 when they're released improve the pacing a bit, and prepare you more for the endgame. How was your experience with the campaign on your first character? And what build did you league start with? I'd love to hear your story down in the comments. Alright, I'm stoked to jump into the next one. Let's dive into the skill gem system. While it's not perfect, this is such a huge improvement over Path of Exile 1 in terms of build creation. There's literally videos for every single skill to see how it functions, with wonderful explainers.
Explosive grenades have a long fuse, but deal devastating damage if you can catch enemies in the blast.
The tooltips of the gems are very thorough. You can hold Alt and hover all the underlined text as well with these. But another cool thing is skills that have multiple effects. These have tabs to explain each different mechanic and interaction of the skill gem, complete with damage effectiveness and everything you need to understand about it. I spent so much time reading all of these. One other insane addition is this little arrow here next to each socketed skill gem. Clicking this expands the skill gem menu where all the calculations are done. I was blown away at how detailed and actually fairly accurate this was. Then there's the gem engraving UI. It's really well organized and even provided recommendations when searching for support gems. I actually really like that you have to think about support gems now, with each support gem only being able to be used once. It was a really fun puzzle to solve, testing out and perfecting each gem combination while leveling. I also enjoy the new Jeweler's Orbs, but I still have yet to find a perfect one. Have you guys found one yet? They're like 200 exalts or something, so good luck. The gems themselves are what we're investing our currency into now, and making changes is so much easier than it would be to chromatic and try to relink all of your gear, so this is a huge W from me. Really the only thing I can think of right now is maybe like being able to D-level gems, like if you have a level 20 that's 20% quality, you just D-level it down to level 1 to like twink out your ult. That's about it. What did you all think about the gem system? Getting my skills just right felt amazing, but the other big piece of the puzzle was putting together my passive tree. Yep, the dreaded or beloved passive tree, depending on who you ask. This thing is absolutely massive, and similarly to Path of Exile 1, the tree is likely what scares away the majority of new players when they see it. It's just huge and daunting at first glance, there's really no way around it. But after 10 or 15 minutes mousing over and reading a lot of the notables and passives on the tree, you really start to get a picture of how you might want to path your character depending on what skill you're using. It's nowhere near as intimidating as the passive tree of the original game in my opinion. And that's likely due to Path of Exile 2 removing all life nodes from the tree and generalizing a lot of the damage types to match up with the skill tag modifiers. But with life all over the tree in Path of Exile 1, it felt really mandatory to take if you were near them. It caused a lot of confusion surrounding how much defense versus offense you should stack on your tree versus your gear, and the removal of all of that just makes thinking about pathing a lot easier, I think. Do you want more crit? Search for crit and find nearby nodes. Are you using a bow? Look for nearby bow or projectile clusters and make your way there. I find it a lot easier to decide on my tree layout, and now it really just comes out to seeking out a few key things that I'm stacking for my build. I'm not gonna lie though, I used the passive tree on Mobalytics to plan out my pathing after nearly bankrupting myself by tinkering too much. Another great thing about it is the attribute pathing points being a choice between all 3 stats. I thought that was a really nice touch. This helped meeting attribute requirements feel a lot better than in the original game in my opinion. I also like how the clusters on the tree are more often than not shaped in the image of what they're for. The crossbow cluster actually looks like a crossbow, the spear node looks like a spear, the druid nodes look like a claw, and so on. I moused over and looked at and read basically the entire tree, so I feel pretty comfortable pathing around now. But there are some players who don't want to even try to interact with this system. For some, it's simply too much. And while I don't foresee GGG ever changing their iconic passive tree, nor do I ever want them to, I think one thing that could help would be some kind of passive tree import and export system. This would allow friends or a creator on YouTube to assist you with a proper passive tree layout, allowing you to share a code for your build tree for someone else to import. It could have some kind of like ghost outline of the pathing and nodes selected, and allow you to follow along as you level. I think something like that could be super cool and really bridge the gap between requiring a path of building too, and it would keep it all in game. What ideas do you guys have to make the passive tree more accessible? I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Alright, onto a semi-controversial topic, the new crafting in Path of Exile 2. So this is kind of a hot topic. Loads of folks want alterations and scouring orbs to be added back into Path of Exile 2. I personally like the way the system is now, with a few caveats. I agree with the sentiment that crafting is now pretty much just identifying ground loot with extra steps, but at the same time it's not. The way crafting acts now makes pretty much every single rare worthwhile, and the mod pool isn't as bloated either. Plus the additional tiers of gear that can drop with better possibilities for good outcomes. And I actually crafted up several upgrades myself. Especially weapons, I feel like the weapon mod pool isn't very bloated at all. But unlike in the first game, I'm actually excited to identify every single rare that I pick up, in the event that it actually hits godly affixes and it's craftable further. It just makes dropped items have some inherent value, which they don't have in Path of Exile 1 in my opinion after a certain point. Essences also provide a degree of determinism in the process, but what's cool to me is that we're actually spending the currency that we're dropping. I've literally spent more exalted orbs on my items in the first 2 weeks of Path of Exile 2 than I did in my entire 8 years playing Path of Exile 1. I think GavrynGaming is really onto something with this system, and as we get more content, I'm sure that new crafting items will be implemented slowly to allow us more determinism in our crafting. But it's a really fine line and they never want to overstep that, which I get. One thing I do think needs to be changed is the ability to remove or replace runes in our gear. The lack of a crafting bench in Path of Exile 2 is actually something I really missed. Runes do solve a bit of a problem, but at the same time they create their own problem. There were several times where I found an upgrade, but I couldn't replace it with the current gear that I had because I didn't have an Artificer's Orb. And there were other times where I'd find a really good piece that would fit some resist that I needed, but I couldn't change all the runes that I had just put in for that resist, so the trade-off wasn't worth it. It just kind of shoehorns you into pieces of gear, similar to Path of Exile 1 with its skill gems, where you'd have to refuse, rechrome, and resocket everything just to fit a single piece of gear in. I feel like it just needs a little bit more flexibility, but by slightly changing the rune system and adding in a few more deterministic crafting items in the future, I think the benefits and approachability of this system over the old one will really begin to shine. I'm a big fan of the shift from spamming the slot machine lever on a single item until you get what you want. What do you guys think? Do you miss the old alteration spamming and scouring orbs? I'd really like to hear from you on this one. Alright Exiles, let's talk about where I've spent the majority of my early access hours. The Endgame. As I said at the beginning of the video, I'm tackling tier 15 and 16 maps without an issue. I swapped over to Ice Strike and I'm using the never sync tech of Combat Frenzy and freezing everything. Doing this activates Combat Frenzy, which provides me with Frenzy charges, which are then converted to power charges via the Resonance Keystone. These power charges continue to power my charged staff. And it's still the same old Tempest Bell charge staff shenanigans, just stacking cold damage and using Ice Strike. I found Freeze to be much more reliable than Electrocute. I'll have a full overview out on my Invoker build after the holidays. After spending a lot of time in the new Atlas though, I can definitely say that the endgame and its systems still need some time in the oven. The Atlas is infinite now, which I really like, and you can travel in any direction basically. But it feels kind of empty right now. There were too many nodes that had no mechanics on them. I wanted either a league mechanic or a boss in just about every other map, but there were several times where there was node after node that were just empty, no mechanics, and it forced me into a really weird position of saving my good waystones for the nodes with solid rewards. So my strategy personally was running a tier lower on the empty nodes, and then I'd run my high tier ones on the bosses, breach, and delirium ones. Using precursor tablets on the towers is how we add the mods to these empty nodes, but the nodes that the towers choose to buff seems completely random. So oftentimes I was still stuck with a lot of empties. Also on the topic of towers, it was a very cool map the first time I ran it. Hell, even the first 10 times I ran it, but after the 20th time I'm already a bit bored of the layout. Also the monster density compared to a normal map is insanely low. So just like with empty nodes, I would run lower tier ones on these towers just to slam the precursor and be done with it. They almost don't feel worth your time, but the precursor buffs are huge. I think as GGG adds more league mechanics during early access, this will feel less bad, and we'll see what happens and review it then. I absolutely love the difficulty and grittiness of maps now though. You'll get slapped if you aren't paying attention. Mapping is no longer a second monitor activity. Where Pee-wee 1 has you blowing up entire screens while watching anime and clicking shiny loot, Path of Exile 2 is way too dangerous for that, and the combat requires an active playstyle to avoid death. The endgame has shifted in a more medium core direction as well, where dying means losing your rewards for that zone. I really like this design, just like Last Epoch's ecosystem. It keeps me from getting lazy with my build or gear if I want to keep progressing. The moment-to-moment gameplay keeps me so much more engaged. The quest progression with Doriani through the map tiers and filling out the Atlas tree felt fine pacing-wise. But after you complete the quest to run tier 15 waystones, you're tasked with finding 3 citadels to obtain 3 fragments to fight the big boss. The issue is there's zero indication when you're near one of these citadels. If you don't mouse over it or recognize it, you'll completely miss it. It doesn't even tell you if you're heading in the right direction across this massive spiderweb to find one of these citadels. It feels like quite a grind and a completely wild goose chase right now, so we'll see if this gets addressed. I think the thing that killed me the most during the endgame was on-death effects that seemingly every rare and even some magic monsters had. Being melee right now is not a good time. I couldn't imagine what it would be like in melee if everything wasn't frozen or CC'd in some way. I literally started dodge rolling away after killing every single rare, and then I would wait a few seconds to make sure that the coast was clear before picking up my loot. I was burnt way too many times. They removed one of the on-death ground effects, the chaos crystals, in a recent patch, but they kept the purple flowers. Their damage was reduced, but the annoyance still persists. In an action game where there's so much going on like this, feeling forced to stare at my character's feet the whole time feels pretty bad. Ground effects were already labeled extremely annoying in Path of Exile 1 with Detonate Dead and others, so I have no idea why they carried this concept forward into Path of Exile 2. I'm not a fan. Right now, overall though, Endgame just feels a bit underdeveloped and disjointed from the rest of the game's vibe. I thoroughly enjoy the shell of what they have going here in Endgame, it just needs more. I look forward to revisiting the endgame in the near future, but right now I'm just kind of build testing a few different classes. Have you made it to maps yet, and if so, what was your highest tier? It's times like these where I need to remind myself that this is just the beginning of a 6 to 12 month early access. The game looks, feels, and plays like a finished product already. Grinding Gear Games will continue to listen to feedback and shape the game around their community, just like they've always done. They're one of the few developers to this day that I trust the vision of. In my next video, I plan to showcase my Invoker Monk build. I won't be labeling these showcases build guides by any means, they'll be more of an overview. I'll discuss the pros and cons of the build and any difficulties that the build has had, as well as my thought process the whole way through of putting it together. I'll continue documenting my successes and failures throughout the entirety of early access. Hopefully you can learn from me or take one of my ideas to the next level. I'm extremely excited that there are new puzzles to solve and discoveries to be made. And that about wraps it up, Exiles. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to my channel for more Path of Exile 2 videos, and if you made it this far into the video, I'd love to hear your story of your experience with the game so far. I'll read every single one of you that take the time to post. I have a lot more Path of Exile 2 content planned, but for now, I'm off to go experiment with more Mercenary. Keep grinding, Exiles, have a happy holiday season, and I'll see you all in the next video. Farewell.